Have you ever went to a beautiful place on vacation, and when you got there and are experiencing it, and you think to yourself, there has to be a God? 3 times comes to mind for me that I've seen. The Grand Canyon, for instance. The first time I was ever at the Grand Canyon, I looked at it and I could not believe the beauty of it. It was so vast and so colorful that I knew no man could have created it. And just by looking at it, I knew there had to be a higher power. And about 30 years ago, we went and seen Mount St. Helen, about 10 years after it blew. Mount St. Helen is a volcano in the state of Washington that erupted in 1980, the same year that we got married. And seeing the devastation and all the volcanic ash covering everything and not allowing anything to grow was amazing, even 10 years after it blew. And as we were driving up to it, all of the 150-foot tall huge pine trees were all laying in the same direction for 40 miles. Again, I felt the presence of the higher power, and I knew God was real. And just a couple of weeks ago, we went out and witnessed the majesty of the redwoods, the sequoias, another amazing and awesome experience and a witness of God's presence. Nature, in my mind, can prove that there is a God in more ways than one. And in the gospel, this is emphasized when Jesus walks on water and calms the mighty wind. Right before the story of the gospel begins, Jesus has just finished feeding the 5,000. Jesus was getting his disciples to leave so that he could dispense the crowds. I'm sure there had to have been some hype when people realized the huge miracle performed by Jesus with the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. I think Jesus wanted to get his disciples to leave to give the rest of the people a hint that it was time to disperse. The disciples take off in a boat to go across the Sea of Galilee, and the rest of the 10 to 15,000 people leave. And Jesus is finally alone. And he goes up the mountain and prays to his Father. And while he's doing that, the disciples spend just about all night on the water, fighting against the wind, trying to get to the other side by themselves. We can imagine that they had been at it for at least 6 to 8 hours by this time. And during the 4th watch of the night, that is between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock, Jesus approached the boat, as it says, walking on water. The disciples saw him and cried out in fear. Jesus first has to calm them down when he says, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." Jesus comes to the boat, walking on water. Can you imagine? Have you ever been in a boat or by a lake when a storm suddenly comes up quickly and it gets really windy? If you're in the boat starts bobbing and tossing, water comes over the bow, and waves get huge, like in no time at all. It is really scary. I lived at the lake for about 15 years, and the biggest problem when you're at the lake is the wind and the storms. The weather at the lake always seems 10 times worse than it is in town because you can see the wind. You can see it because of the water. You can see what the water does by what it does to the water. And sometimes it gets pretty scary. And what is so amazing to me about this story is Jesus controls that wind. Immediately when Jesus gets into the boat, the wind stops. And this has to leave quite an impression on the disciples. After the disciples know that it is Jesus, Peter sees our Lord approaching the boat, and he says, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." and Jesus tells him to come. Peter leaves the safety of the boat and enters the ferocious storm. As long as Peter stays focused on Jesus, he was fine, walking on water. But when he paid more attention to the wind and the waves and the storm, he began to sink. When Peter began to sink, he hollered to Jesus, "Save me." And Jesus immediately stretched out his hand and lifted Peter up and saved him. And Jesus says to Peter, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Aren't we all a little like Peter? Or maybe a lot like Peter? Haven't we all at one point or another had little faith? And haven't we all had storms in our lives where we should have hollered out, "Jesus, save me"? And maybe when we lost someone close to us, a loved one, a spouse or a child. Maybe we've had a serious illness, a heart condition, cancer, or maybe we've had it or are worried about getting a serious illness like COVID-19. Maybe we've lost our job or our marriage is not going very well, anxiety or depression, and the list goes on and on. Our problem is when we focus more on our troubles and less on Jesus, we begin to sink. And when we make our storm bigger than what we think Jesus can handle, we are making a huge mistake. Most of the time we feel we can get through these storms ourselves. We try to get the boat across the stormy sea by ourselves. We in our minds don't need any help. We don't need any comfort or love or advice. We can do this on our own, we think. Someone offers to help us and we get scared. We become terrified to talk about it. We clam up and we get down and we don't know what to do. Peter in this gospel gives us some insight about what we need to do. We need to keep focused on our Lord or the storm will overtake us. We will capsize into the depths of the sea of despair if we lose sight of him. During this pandemic, adoration has been a way for us to do this during the pandemic. Social distancing is easy in a church this size, and our Lord being present physically on the altar is waiting for us to grab us before we sink. Jesus does come for us, and it's usually after we've been at it for a while. But he does come, sometimes in the fourth watch of the night. He may come himself, or he may come in the face of a neighbor, or a friend, or in the face of a mom or a dad, or brother or sister, or a priest or a deacon. But he will come, and he has the power, not only over nature, but over all principalities and all powers. He can overcome all things if we stay focused on him. We might have to holler at him sometime and say, "Lord, save me." But he will be there for us, to grab us, to pull us out of the depths of our storms. And all he has to say to us is, "Come." And he will give us the power to walk in the storm. I honestly believe that God allows us to walk through these storms of life and helps us through them so that in the future we can be there for someone else who is walking through the same kind of storm. And we can say to that person, "Do not be afraid. I'm here for you."